The lunch rush had already leaned into noise when the door chime over the diner's entrance stuttered twice and 4 men in gray suits posted themselves inside like they were guarding a vault that could spill at any second. According to Marta Alvarez, the owner behind the counter, they didn't order coffee. They didn't even look at the menu. Their eyes tracked the old man in booth 3, Arthur Whitaker, thin as a curtain rod and faithful to the same seat, the one with a crooked view of the bus stop and the busted neon in the laundromat sign. Keisha Monroe carried 2 plates balanced on her left hand, onion rings skirting the edge, a BLT leaning into the ketchup. She says she felt the room tighten the second those men turned sideways to see her pass. She puts the plates down, forces a smile at the bus driver from the depot on Linden, then slices past a family glued to their phones, unconsciously hugging her notepad like a shield. A TV above the pie case hummed a story about neighborhood parks. Flicker of B-roll, a voiceover with the tone of bad weather incoming. Then the channel cut to a creator's face saying in a soft, defiant cadence, "Like and subscribe for more stories that challenge prejudice and celebrate courage." It floated over the clatter and steam, tucked itself into Keisha's ear, then drifted out with the sigh of the espresso machine. "You Arthur Whitaker?" the taller one asked, stopping at booth 3. According to Keisha's recollection, the voice knew the answer. It had the trait of people who ask as a formality. Arthur's hearing wasn't top shelf, but he understood posture. He looked up slowly from his tea. His tweed cap stayed on. "That depends who's asking." "Counsel from Whitaker Holdings," the tall one said, not offering a card. His shoulders dropped a fraction, the kind of relaxed that reads as practice. "We need to speak to you." Keisha angled in, her hand on the coffee pot. He just sat down. "Can this wait?" According to the later transcript from a deposition, she kept her tone neutral, like asking for a refill in the quiet part between shifts. "We're not speaking to you," said a woman in a steel blue suit who stood half a step behind the tall man. Her folder had a gold crest, the kind of logo built to last through scandals. "Mr. Whitaker, there are matters requiring your immediate attention. Please gather your things." Arthur glanced at Keisha like a man glancing at a ledge. The diner clock ticked louder than the chatter. On the radio, a trill of advertisement insisted that summer tires were on sale. According to security footage, Arthur kept his hand on the ceramic mug while his eyes moved to the window and back. "I don't have things," he said. "I have soup." The 4 bodyguards shifted their stance. They weren't the charging kind. They were the kind that turned space into invisible fences. One of them adjusted his earpiece with the absent-mindedness of a pianist flexing a wrist. Marta stepped out from behind the counter, dish towel collapsed in her hand. "This is a restaurant," she said. "If you want a table, I seat you. If you have legal paper, you serve it outside. If you want to intimidate an old man, you picked the wrong building." According to witnesses, her voice left no room for parentheses. The tall counsel tried a smile he'd used in courthouses. "No intimidation. We simply need a private word." Keisha's fingers tightened on the coffee pot handle. "He can speak for himself," she said, eyes on Arthur. "Do you want to go with them?" Arthur blinked, his lips parted. He seemed to taste words and put them back. He looked at Keisha and then at the steam of his tea. "I came for soup," he said, almost to himself. Keisha inclined her head, a little nod toward the unwritten rules of the diner. No one gets escorted anywhere without consent. "Then you'll have soup." "What's your name?" the woman in the steel blue suit asked. "Keisha," she said, lifting the coffee from the metal ring heater. "It's on my tag." The woman's gaze scraped it and came back with nothing. "Keisha, you are interfering in a legal matter. Mr. Whitaker has obligations. There's a conservatorship in place. He is not empowered to make independent decisions." Marta inhaled like she'd been told the stove was full of smoke. "We need to see that," she said, "and you show it outside." The tall counsel glanced at his bodyguards, shrugged like he was indulging a child, and gestured toward the door. The 4 suits stepped back toward the entrance, arms behind their backs, watches flashing in the cheap fluorescent light. The woman held her folder as if hugging a cold secret. Keisha followed them, refilling coffees by muscle memory. At booth 3, Arthur's right hand trembled. Keisha set the pot down and crouched low so her eyes were level with his. "Do you have someone of your own?" she asked. "A lawyer, a doctor, anyone you trust we can call?" He nodded toward his jacket pocket. "Card," he said, breath like paper. "Ruth." Keisha found the business card with her fingertips. The ink of Ruth Delgado, elder law, had bled at the edges like it had once been in a damp pocket. A handwritten number was scrawled on the back. She pressed the card to her palm and stood. "I got you," she said. According to her later statement, those words were more reflex than promise, but they sounded like a line she could spend the next year paying for. Outside, the air had a grit of late winter. The lawyers fanned at the base of the diner steps. The woman in steel blue presented 2 sheets in a clear sleeve. "Temporary emergency conservatorship," she said, "issued yesterday. The court recognized the necessity for immediate protection due to Mr. Whitaker's diminished capacity and risk of undue influence." Her eyes drifted past Keisha's shoulder to Arthur, who was sipping tea with both hands like a child with hot chocolate. Marta took the papers. "We'll call his lawyer," she said. "You can wait in the lobby." The lobby was technically a narrow strip with a corkboard displaying flyers for night classes and a missing tabby cat with crossed eyes. "We'll wait here," the tall counsel said, and didn't move. One of the bodyguards scanned the street with a gaze that honored threats Keisha would never see. Keisha dialed the number on the card from the wall phone like it had weight. The ringtone cut twice and a low, focused voice answered. "Delgado." "This is Keisha from Linden Diner," she said. "Your client, Arthur Whitaker, is here. 4 lawyers and 4 bodyguards are trying to take him." She heard herself and realized how it sounded. "They say there's a conservatorship." There was a pause that felt like a shift in gravity. "Is he safe right now?" Ruth asked. "Yes," Keisha said. "We're inside. He's eating." "Do not let him leave with anyone until I get there," Ruth said. "If there is an order, I need to see it. Ask for court timestamp. I'm 15 minutes out. Call 911 if anyone tries to take him by force. Understood?" "Got it," Keisha said. She hung up and walked back to booth 3. Arthur's spoon moved like time-lapse. She knelt again. "Ruth is coming," she said. "We're going to be all right." "You already are," he said, and his eyes went back to the window like a habit. According to Marta, he always sat where he could watch the bus stop. He'd told her the years would surprise you with whom you started waiting for, and kept that practice whether or not anyone showed up. Within minutes, that stretched like a line on a monitor. A quiet police officer appeared. Not the kind who bark orders. This one had shoulders that belonged to a high school track star, now decorated with a badge that looked too loud on his chest. He identified himself, then asked to see the papers. The tall counsel offered them as if the outcome had been pre-written. "Emergency conservatorship granted yesterday," the officer said, eyes scanning. "Judge's signature. Name of the conservator?" "Whitaker Holdings," the woman in blue said, "as corporate entity. He built it. We maintain his well-being." "Does Mr. Whitaker have counsel?" the officer asked. "Yes," Keisha said. "Ruth Delgado. She's on her way." The officer nodded. He stood between the door and the men without looking like a wall. The bodyguards looked past him like they could see over oceans. When Ruth arrived, she didn't look like a TV lawyer. She looked like a high school teacher who sat on the edge of her desk and told you she expected better. Hair in a bun that wasn't strictly a bun. 2 bags, one soft-sided with the patina of emergencies, one hard case with documents that had folded too many nights. She read the orders. "This is limited, not full," she said. "Financial only, and only to freeze transfers above a certain amount. It does not empower removal of person or choice of medical care or residency. You aren't taking him anywhere." "His judgment is impaired," the tall counsel said, a little more volume. "He is at risk." "From whom?" Ruth asked. "A waitress? A bus stop? Soup?" Her eyes were dark and calm like courtroom oak. If you have concerns about undue influence, file a motion. But you will not physically remove him, not now, not today. The tall counsel could have argued. The paper was a lit cord, but it was also a trapdoor. He gestured to his bodyguards to stand down a hair. "We'll be in touch," he said. They left with the same precise choreography they'd used entering. The chime stumbled them out into the gray. According to the camera above the door, one of the bodyguards looked back and settled eyes on Keisha for exactly half a second, as if to memorize a shape. Ruth sat at Arthur's booth. Keisha poured her water without being asked. "Arthur," Ruth said, voice gentle, "you called." "I didn't want to be put somewhere," he said, and his hands gave his cup shelter. "Who told you that would happen?" "They did," he said, "on paper, on the phone, in those voices." He didn't have to explain which voices. Ruth set her pen down. "We're going to need to file for protective orders," she said to Keisha and Marta, "and make sure he's not alone in public places until we get clarity." She spoke with a pace that made hard things feel possible by arranging them into steps. In Keisha's pocket, her phone buzzed, a text from her sister. "How's your shift?" "Heavier than a shift," she typed, then deleted it and wrote, "Busy, home after." According to Keisha's schedule, she had 3 more tables and the clatter of college classes printed out in a folder in her backpack in the locker room. "Arthur," Ruth said, "we need to talk about your company, about what they want." "I'm not their company," he said, and there was a shake in the sentence that you wouldn't feel on paper. "I walked away." "Why?" Keisha asked, only after she'd asked him if he needed a refill, and he'd nodded no. "Because I couldn't stand the way the air felt there," he said. "Because I built houses, and they liked the parties in the houses and not the roofs that didn't leak. Because I sat in a meeting and said we would pay the men who got sick on the job, and they said that would encourage more to get sick." He paused. "Because I made something, and it made itself bigger than me, and then it told me I was a little piece it didn't need." Ruth leaned forward. "And now?" "They're using my age like a key," he said, and lifted his cup to watch the tea tremble. Keisha had a bus to catch if she wanted to get across town to her night class in time, but her feet weren't moving. She took a breath she calculated would last her 4 minutes. "You got somewhere safe?" she asked him. "Motels don't collect you after," Arthur said, and the words landed soft yet heavy on the laminate table. Marta put her dish towel down. "You'll come back here at closing," she said. "We'll drive you. I got a spare room above the pantry for days I don't have days." Her voice softened with the generosity of people who remember what it felt like when someone took a chance on them. "Until we figure out where you stand." Ruth nodded. "Short-term stability is safety," she said. "This is good, but we need a plan." She looked at Arthur. "Do you have copies of anything? Medical directives? Trust documents?" Arthur's head tilted like he was hearing a song from another room. "Locker," he said. "Jefferson Storage, number 105. Old things." "Keys?" Ruth asked. He patted his jacket until his hand landed on a low pocket and brought out a square of metal keys. They chattered like teeth against the table. Keisha glanced around to see if the sound had changed the room. It hadn't. The room had stayed full of families and bus drivers and construction guys and singles devoted to their phones, everyone working on their own little crises. This was always how it was, she thought. Big decisions happening in places that smelled like coffee. According to later filings, what was inside Locker 105 would alter the shape of a corporation and the way the city understood a contract that had paid for 2 bridges. According to Keisha, what was inside that locker was a box of paper that told the truth while everyone was trying to use their voices to make it something else. By closing time, the quiet had settled like something earned. The lawyers hadn't returned. A fog rolled in and made the streetlight cones look like lanterns in the slow. Keisha finished wiping down booth 3, the rag damp on her fingers. Arthur had fallen asleep sitting upright for 21 minutes, then woke and blinked as if counting the spaces between sounds. "Come on," Keisha said. "Let's get you tucked in." Marta led the way to the back stairs up to the apartment above the pantry, 2 rooms that had housed ambition and sorrow a few times over. According to the lease, it wasn't designated for tenants. According to need, it was. Don't worry about the paperwork, Marta said, making a bed with the economy of a woman who's moved in the night. We'll handle policy tomorrow. Policy is a thing that happens to the poor, Arthur said, not to companies. Then he seemed to regret the sentence and put it back in his mouth like a seed. Keisha laid a throw blanket down over his knees and saw the bruises on his shins only because she was kneeling. You fall? She asked, gentle. Chair bit me, he said, and glanced away. Uh-huh, she said, filing the shape of the bruise the way mothers file the sounds a fever makes. 2 days later at 10:17 a.m., according to the timestamp on the storage facility's security camera, Keisha and Ruth unlocked Unit 105 while Arthur watched from a folding chair Ruth had brought for him because pride was not a useful currency and rest was. The unit smelled like cardboard and winter coats. Keisha pulled the roll-up door and her biceps sang in a way that would cost her later. Inside, boxes of files labeled with decades' names, an old drafting table that had known cigarette smoke, a dentist's waiting room chair with green vinyl that sighed as if it had been waiting this whole time. What are we looking for exactly? Keisha asked. Whatever they want, Ruth said, which, in her mouth, sounded like both a joke and a target. On the way to the back, Keisha bumped a box and it spilled manila folders like a paper avalanche catching its breath at the lip. She crouched and caught the one that nearly slid under the drafting table. The tab read, Reg Compliance, Jobs 455-480. Inside were memos with letterheads from Whitaker Holdings and initials and acronyms that sounded like bad spells. She flipped and stopped at a page with highlighted paragraphs. According to internal email, McLeod to Sims, 2011, the company had redirected funds from Worker Safety Fund to public-facing philanthropic initiatives in order to maximize reputational benefit per dollar. In the margin, someone had written, No, underlined. That your handwriting? Ruth asked Arthur, who was studying the concrete. I used to write like I meant it, he said. Keisha kept reading, flipping with care and speed. Here, she said, and held up a binder clip of photocopies of checks. According to dates, these checks were issued to consulting firms that shared office space with Shell LLCs and couches. She recognized one name from a news story about a condo project that had collapsed a ceiling on tenants. This looks bad, she said. It looks like a heartbeat, Ruth said, scanning. This is enough to demand an independent review. She looked at Arthur. I can slow them down with this. I can get a judge to say no more moves until we sort this out. Arthur swallowed. They'll bring more men, he said, with the flat certainty of a man who'd seen how much muscle money could hire. Then we bring more light, Ruth said. By afternoon, the bodyguards had escalated. They didn't appear at the diner. They appeared at the motel, where the manager, a man with a mustache that had survived 2 marriages, called Marta to say 4 men in suits were asking questions about the old guy who walks with a stoop. According to a sworn statement, the men implied liens and code violations. They weren't police. They were persuasion. Marta hung up and pressed her fists into the counter like she was kneading the city. We're moving him, she said. Permanent, until this is done. You can't keep him upstairs forever, Keisha said softly. Watch me, Marta said, then softened. No, you're right. He needs medical. He needs a place that counts on paper. She looked at Keisha. Your aunt still works at Mercy East? Yes, Keisha said, part-time in admissions. She already had her phone half out. According to hospital intake notes obtained later, Arthur was admitted under observation, not because his body had flagged spectacularly, but because isolation is a medical condition that hides behind other ones. His chart logged risk of elder financial abuse as a line item and noted an external advocate present, R. Delgado. For 2 nights, Keisha finished shifts and went to Mercy East and sat by his bed and watched him sleep. According to the beeping machines, his heart didn't want to be dramatic. He woke and ate saltines and called the Jell-O architectural. The TV in the corner ran a carousel of daytime shows, then documentaries about animals with sad music, then the local news. One night, a segment flicked by about Whitaker Holdings announcing a new community inheritance program, and the voiceover used phrases like expanding the vision of their founder. It ran glossy footage of ribbon cuttings and men in mid-priced suits pretending to understand blueprints. "That mine?" Arthur asked, gesturing at the screen with his spoon. Keisha blinked. "Looks like they're using your name to clean the floors," she said. He smiled a little, fragile. "My name used to frighten people for 1 hour. Then it started to make them hungry." On the third morning, Ruth arrived with eggs in a bag and eyes that had been awake through the dark. "Emergency hearing at 2, she said. "They want to convert the conservatorship to full. They say you're being manipulated." She handed him a pair of shoes with laces that wouldn't trip him. "I will fight that. I don't want you to speak unless asked." "Keisha," she said, "I want you there." Keisha's chest registered the weight and the honor and the fear like a train moving under her feet. "Okay," she said. According to the docket, courtroom 3B had blinds that didn't quite agree about how much light to let in. The judge wore patience with the authority of a farmer staring down weather, and a bailiff with a mustache like history itself called names and instructed everyone to sit who was inclined to stand. The tall counsel stood for Whitaker Holdings. The woman in steel blue sat with a tablet, a stylus flicking like a nervous bird. Ruth stood like the side of a barn. Keisha sat behind Arthur with a hand on her own wrist so she wouldn't fidget. "Your Honor," the tall counsel began, voice tuned to the middle distance, "we aren't villains. We are caretakers of a legacy. Mr. Whitaker is in his late 70s. He is increasingly unable to manage his affairs and is vulnerable to influence by parties unknown." His eyes skated over Keisha as if she were a chair. Ruth stood. "Your Honor," she said, "we have notes from Mercy East indicating no cognitive impairment sufficient to warrant full conservatorship. We have documentation, internal memos from Whitaker Holdings, that raises serious concerns about the motivations behind this proceeding. Mr. Whitaker does not wish to be controlled. He wishes to be heard." The judge leaned in with his elbows. "We're not relitigating corporate ethics today," he said. "We're addressing a human being's rights. We'll start with competency. Mercy East?" A doctor with eyes that always seemed to be seeing what was right behind you testified in terms that apologized for being dry. "Mild memory lapses consistent with age, attention intact, judgment intact. Patient is capable of expressing preferences and understanding consequences. No basis for full conservatorship." The tall counsel pushed. "But susceptible," he said. "He gave away his address to a waitress. He's allowing himself to be moved by people he barely knows." "That waitress saved him from you on Tuesday," Marta muttered so softly the air absorbed it. "Let's hear from this waitress," the judge said, as if he'd read lips without trying. "Ms. Monroe?" Keisha walked to the front with steps she practiced in her mind. According to the digital record, her voice was soft but didn't break. "I work at Linden Diner," she began. "Mr. Whitaker has eaten at my section most days since October. I bring him tea and soup. We talk about buses and books and the weather like it's a mirror for other things. He always pays in cash, exact to the penny. He always knows how much is due. He has a card for his lawyer and a list of his medicines, and we check them. On Tuesday, men came to take him. He said he wanted soup, so I served him soup. I called his lawyer. That's all I did." "Do you have a relationship with Mr. Whitaker beyond the diner?" the tall counsel asked. "Has he given you gifts?" "He gave me a book," she said. "A paperback about bridges. And a thank you, more than once. They felt like gifts. Yesterday I bought him socks. That felt like a normal thing." She folded her hands in front of her as if they might dislodge numbers if left alone. "Have you encouraged him to give you money?" "No," she said. "I encouraged him to eat." The courtroom softened in an exhale nobody owned. The judge permitted himself the smallest of smiles. "You're not on trial, Ms. Monroe," he said, "but thank you. Then he turned. "Mr. Whitaker, do you want to speak?" Arthur stood with a carefulness that commanded more respect than Swagger ever had. He held the chair with 2 fingers like he'd always done math and wasn't about to stop now. "I built houses," he said. "I know when beams get rotten. You can paint over them until someone leans on the wall and it all goes. I stopped wanting to paint. I wanted to fix. They didn't. I don't want to live where a wallpaper company makes the rules." The judge's eyes were full of a farmer's weather again. "Full conservatorship denied," he said, and the words dropped into the room like a plumb bob finding true. "We'll maintain a limited conservatorship for financial transactions above $50,000 until this is sorted. Mr. Whitaker is free to choose his counsel, residence, medical care, and lunch." The tall counsel nodded as if this was always one of the possible outcomes they'd factored into their war map. "We respect the court," he said, the phrase well worn. Ruth closed her eyes for 1 second like a prayer and then started writing. According to her notes, every victory required a sprint afterward. Outside the courthouse, the air had turned into a day you could wear. Reporters with cameras were slower than rumors, but faster than a lie getting dressed. One shoved a microphone toward Keisha. "Do you have any comment?" he asked. "I have to get back to work," she said, which is what she'd say if the apocalypse stopped by around lunch. Arthur touched her elbow. "You don't have to keep carrying me," he said. Keisha shrugged. "I'm not heavy," she said, "just stubborn." That night at the diner, the regulars asked if it had been on TV. "I don't know," Keisha said, which could have meant I didn't look, or I didn't want to know yet, or it doesn't change how much coffee you want. The bus driver left a note under a 5. "Proud of you." The teenage dishwasher hummed a melody he called a beat and pretended not to be impressed. Weeks folded into a rhythm like coasts get waves. Arthur had checkups and a haircut from a barber who had a mirror too big for his shop. He moved into a senior apartment 2 bus lines away, which made him proud because he liked to be measured by the buses he could take. Keisha adjusted his pill organizer on Sundays while he watched a nature show narrated by a voice with kindness baked in. Ruth filed motions. Whitaker Holdings filed glossy brochures. According to a city council agenda, there would be a hearing on whether to look at the company's contracts. Bureaucracy flirted with action. One afternoon, Keisha found a note tucked under the salt at booth 3. Paper torn from a cheap pad, folded twice. Inside, a single sentence in shaky block letters. "They don't like light." She glanced toward the window instinctively. The bus stop was empty. She pictured a man's hand behind the paper and a struggle between legibility and tremor. "Arthur?" she asked when she delivered his tea. He looked down and nodded. "I argued with the K," he said, and smiled. "I won." It was that note that made her pull out her phone and create a list. According to the list, one of her tasks was small and specific. Document. She started keeping a log with times and dates. When she texted Ruth about the note, Ruth texted back a thumbs up and the words, "Always assume they know less than they pretend and more than they should." At night, after her shift and her class and checking on her son at her sister's, Keisha read. Articles, statutes, stories of guardianships gone wrong, playbooks companies use to manage optics, accounts of whistleblowers who got called traitors by the thing they loved because nobody likes to see a mirror when they asked for a witness. She learned where the city posted the minutes of meetings and how to download them without clicking through 8 screens designed to make you give up. She learned that money often said one thing while walking in a different direction. "Why you?" her sister asked one night, stirring stew on the stove like she was reducing the day. "You got 2 jobs and a brain chasing better there's no time for." "Because he comes to my table," Keisha said. "Because there are a lot of people like him with less luck, and because I'm in the room, so I'm in the story whether I asked for it or not." "You say that and I hear Mama," her sister said with equal parts grief and awe. At the 6-week mark, according to records in the clerk's office, Ruth filed a motion for discovery aimed at internal communications regarding the conservatorship strategy. Whittaker Holdings countered with a PR push, a new scholarship named after Arthur, a mural in a neighborhood that had lost its grocery store, a panel discussion with the word ethics in the title, and no time for questions. The day the panel was set, the diner's doors opened and a young woman in a blazer that cost more than Keisha's rent stepped in, moving like air didn't touch her. She had a name tag that said Guest Services Coordinator, Whittaker Holdings. She asked to speak to Keisha quietly. Her smile was polished, her words oiled. "We're not the enemy," she said. "We know you care about Mr. Whittaker. We do too. We'd love to involve you in our community initiatives. We're offering paid partnerships to local voices who can help share positive stories. You could lead a storytelling workshop." She slid an envelope toward Keisha's apron. "There's a stipend." Keisha looked at the envelope like it might blossom into teeth. "No," she said. "Thank you." "We're just trying to—" "I said no," Keisha said, not louder, just closer. The woman's smile stiffened. "We'll be telling the story regardless," she said, and left a business card with an email that would never bounce. Keisha took the envelope and, according to Marta's later affidavit, slid it into the walk-in freezer behind the packaged peas in case anyone ever needed proof of the coldness of certain offerings. That night, Arthur brought a stack of photos in a brown envelope that had served as the family album of men who didn't take time for albums. "This is me and Ada," he said, pointing at a picture of two people on a porch with paint still drying on their sleeves. "Alabama, 1961. The light in the picture was uneven the way old light is. Ada looked like she laughed with her whole mouth. Arthur looked like a closed fist learning to remember it belonged to a hand. "I wasn't a good father," he said, surprising himself with the sentence. "I had a son, and then I had a company. After she died, I tried to make the company take me instead. It didn't. It took everything else." Keisha put her hand on the edge of the picture like she was steadying a frame. "You still got Texas in your voice a little," she said, "because sometimes a kind observation is what keeps confession from breaking something." He didn't correct her. It wasn't Texas. It was the fault line between North and South. According to later interviews, the turning point came with the leak. The internal emails Keisha and Ruth found in storage were a map, but the leak was the flashlight and the battery. An anonymous envelope arrived at the diner addressed to Keisha in block letters with a stamp that had been pressed too hard. Inside, a USB drive in a baggie and a note that said, "The board minutes you're looking for. Do not trust their transcripts." She held the drive like it was a delicate piece of someone's conscience. Ruth had the drive imaged by an expert who looked like a grad student and smelled like confidence. According to the report, the files were legit. Unredacted minutes of board meetings where strategies had been outlined to neutralize dissenting founder influence and channel philanthropic funds toward politically advantageous verticals. Lines like, "Engage aggressive counsel to explore capacity challenge. Leverage emergency conservatorship to prevent founder from making unpredictable statements at public hearings. Cultivate surrogates in media. Neutralize diner woman." Keisha felt the air leave her lungs reading that last line. "I don't even have a last name in their mouth," she said. "You don't need one for them to plan around you," Ruth said, gaze steady. They brought the material to the judge in chambers first to avoid turning the city into a circus where clowns were never funny. The judge read with a sigh that had arguments in it and ordered certain pages sealed and certain actions unsealed. He widened the discovery and narrowed the company's ability to operate without oversight. Whittaker Holdings counsel withdrew their smile and replaced it with paperwork. The lawyers returned to the diner once more with 4 bodyguards, and this time they brought a man Keisha had not yet seen. He was younger than Arthur by 25 years and had eyes like a river in a drought. His jaw worked when idle. He introduced himself as Colin Whittaker, son. He could have been anybody's son with that haircut and that coat, but everyone knew who he was as soon as he said the name. "Dad," he said, and the word fell into the room like a coin that could buy the past if only you pressed hard enough. Arthur looked up slowly. If regret had a color, it washed the booth. "Colin," he said, and didn't stand. According to Ruth's later notes, she left them space with the care you leave two fireworks in a field. "We're not trying to hurt you," Colin said. "The media is chewing on this. You don't need to be a mascot for strangers. Let us take you home. We'll take care of everything." He moved as if approaching a deer, steady, soothing, forgetful of the rifles tucked in the trees. "I had a home," Arthur said, "with your mother, then you. Then I moved into an office and called it a home because it had carpet. I built an empire of doors and forgot which one was ours. I'm ready to be a person again." "You're being used," Colin said, eyes flicking at Keisha as if she were a mirror that agreed with him. "I'm being listened to," Arthur said. Colin's gaze hardened into something that had to be practiced to stay alive in rooms where power is the floor and the walls and the ceiling. "This will end badly," he said. "It's already ended badly," Arthur said, with an odd peace. "We're starting over." The bodyguards shifted, but no hands were raised. The sequence played out with the precision of a scene performed for the 10th time, lines delivered, pauses inhabiting their old timing. In the end, Ruth extended a restraining order across the table like a legal net, and they left, their backs straight with resentment that looked a lot like grief in a suit. According to witnesses who came every day for the pancakes, Keisha didn't celebrate. She wiped the table with that rag again like the rag had become a character in the story. "You okay?" Marta asked. "Ever been underestimated so hard you could use it as a ladder?" Keisha said, half-smile. Marta laughed without amusement. "Every Tuesday," she said. A month later, the city council held their hearing. It was scheduled for late afternoon because accountability likes people at work while it makes choices. Keisha arrived with Ruth and Arthur. The room had that stale policy smell that reminds you urgency had to survive a long wait and might have forgotten how to breathe. Staffers clicked pens in unison like a percussion section with no conductor. Cameras lined up like men who had reinvented their purpose 3 times. According to the agenda, after the second item about pothole repair came review of compliance and ethics standards for city contractors. According to the long, watching eyes in the room, the second item was a stretch, and the third item was a match. The committee chair had a voice that sounded better in churches. He opened with a statement about the importance of integrity. Whitaker Holdings Council delivered a sharp presentation about their investments in the city and the jobs they provided and the youth camps they funded where children built birdhouses painted in the company's colors. Then Ruth stood beside a screen and clicked a remote, and the board minutes appeared with black marks where the judge had insisted and white space where shame had not been invited. The sentence about the diner woman hung on the screen for a heartbeat longer than the rest. "Who wrote that?" a councilwoman asked. "Unknown," Ruth said. "Attribution has been obscured, but the sentiment is institutional. It's in the grammar." Keisha stepped to the microphone when asked and introduced herself as a waitress, as a student, as a mother, as a resident of a block that the city loved to photograph when it wanted to prove it was paying attention. "I'm not important," she said, "but I make lunch for important people. And when a person who made this city's skyline came to my table, he asked for soup and respect. That's the only thing I know how to deliver. I'm telling you that because systems punish the people who do small kindnesses while they fund themselves with big lies. This city taught me to carry 2 plates in one hand, and to say baby to strangers, and to figure out decimal points in my head because the register freezes sometimes. It also taught me that if someone tells you they're protecting you while they're taking your choice, you're not safe." She paused. "You asked for comment. That's my comment." The applause was not loud. It was specific. The kind you hear when people realize the truth comes in a voice they didn't audition. The committee voted to recommend an independent oversight panel. It didn't cut the company out of their contracts. It did make lying harder for a while. In the weeks that followed, Keisha's life didn't turn into a movie where you get a check and a montage. Money didn't arrive. Instead, small recognitions did. A man at the bus stop nodded with the kind of respect that had nothing to do with fear. A high school English teacher asked her to talk about telling the truth in rooms that didn't order it. A podcaster invited her to speak and mispronounced her last name, then fixed it on air. She went on a second-hand store spree for a blazer that meant business and shoes that meant comfort, because there is nothing brave about blisters. Arthur's health dipped and rose like a boat that had to choose each wave. He had a scare, then 2 good days, then a day where he spilled his tea and cried quietly because he didn't know why. Keisha started reading to him, articles mostly, because he liked the way sentences tried to prove things. When she ran out of articles he hadn't heard, she read him that paperback about bridges he had given her, and they both pretended they hadn't read it already. One quiet afternoon, he pressed a folded letter into her hand. "Don't open until you can sit," he said. His eyes said more, things like "thank you" and "I'm sorry," and if I were 25 I would have made different decisions. And here we are. He died on a Wednesday in May, according to the hospital's record, in a room with a view of a tree that stayed stubbornly green. He did not die alone. Ruth sat with him. Keisha was on her way, stuck behind a garbage truck that had to be there because the city gets rid of its trash on a schedule. He went without being told when to go, and that felt important in ways that mercy is important. The lawyer and the bodyguards came to the funeral with faces that made a tie into a purpose. Colin came with his suit and his grief, and his fingers twisted white in a ritual that asks for forgiveness out loud with silence. He hugged Keisha like a man hugging a stranger he owes everything and can't afford to pay. She hugged him back like a person who had learned that hugging is not a currency, but a language. After the service, there was a reading of the will, because there are rules and there are rituals, and sometimes they're the same. Ruth did it in a small room with windows that looked like eyes closing. Arthur left most of his money to a fund called the Ada Whitaker Worker Care Initiative, which he had set up with Ruth years ago, and which had been dormant like a seed in the dark. It was to be funded by the sale of a property he had kept in his own name as a quiet rebellion. The fund would pay for medical bills of workers who got sick building the city they couldn't breathe. To Keisha, he left something that made her feel both proud and dizzy: the rights to the story. "I want you to own what they tried to turn you into," he had written, ink uneven but intent clear. "You told the truth and didn't ask for credit."
This is not credit. This is permission to turn kindness into record. He included a check with more zeros than she had seen in one place with her name attached to it, and instructions for how to set up a nonprofit if she wanted. "Or pay tuition, or buy your son a red bicycle, or set it on fire to keep warm," he wrote. "It's your call." "People will have opinions," Ruth said, soft. "People already do," Keisha said, and stared at her hands as if they had morphed while she wasn't looking. According to an op-ed that got shared more than most words get to travel, the story of a diner waitress and an old man had changed something intangible. It had made the word caretaker mean something bigger than paperwork and smaller than a marketing plan. It had put a name to the way people move each other through a day. Keisha didn't quit the diner. She reduced her hours and started a class called Stories of Work at the community center on 14th Street. The first night, 5 people showed up: a bus driver, a janitor, a teacher, a home health aide, a guy who hated his job at the call center and couldn't explain why he came other than he'd followed a feeling. They wrote about lunch breaks and emergency rooms and the sound forks make on the rims of plates. They wrote their names in a circle on the board, and a woman in scrubs said, "I didn't think this was for me." And everyone said, "It is, it is." 4 months after Arthur's death, the oversight panel released a report. According to the summary, it found systemic issues at Whitaker Holdings that had allowed funds earmarked for worker care to be redirected. It recommended sanctions, restitution, a reduction in eligibility for certain public contracts until internal reforms had proven not just installed, but lived. The company's counsel promised reforms with sincerity that might have been real and might have been rehearsed. Time would sort it. On a Saturday morning that tasted like tomatoes and sun,
Keisha unlocked the diner.
She had a copy of Arthur's letter in her apron pocket because some things you don't leave on a dresser. A kid skateboarded past and didn't look up, which felt like good luck. She turned the TV on low. The first thing out of it was a voice saying, with a laugh threaded through it, "Like and subscribe for more stories that challenge prejudice and celebrate courage." She stood there and felt the way the words had changed since she'd first heard them. They had been wallpaper. Now they were blueprint. She poured the first coffee and stood by the window for a second longer than she needed to. According to her son, she had a new habit of pausing right before the day started as if calibrating the weight she'd carry. According to Marta, she'd always done that. Now people just noticed. A man at table 4 asked for more sugar. A woman at 6 asked if the pancakes were as good as the rumor claimed. The city did its thing. Sirens, laughter, a dog with a stick he couldn't fit through the gate but tried anyway. Keisha moved in it with something like grace. Later that afternoon, the bodyguards came by again. Not all 4, just one. He wasn't on the clock. He didn't wear an earpiece. He held his hat in his hands like a thing he wasn't sure he was allowed to bring inside. "Miss Monroe," he said, tipping it awkwardly. "I wanted to say—" He stopped and the sentence looked for clothes. "I wanted to say that my mother's a nurse. The fund paid one of her friend's bills. No one else would. That was you and Mr. Whitaker. Thank you." Keisha blinked and nodded. "We're all just passing cups," she said, the words leaving her mouth before she could make them dress up. He smiled, small. "I'll leave you be," he said, and he did. Keisha went back to pouring coffee. She thought of all the lives that had intersected at booth 3. The men who came to take, the man who came to eat, the women who came to stop it, the city that came in and out like breathing. She thought of the habit of underestimation, how it had almost allowed a man's life to be rerouted. She thought of the sentence Arthur had underlined in those minutes. No. She thought of the way that small word had been the lever. That night she sat by the window in her apartment and read Arthur's letter again, his voice in it like a track that doesn't wear out. "I always liked bridges," he had written. "They are visible and honest. They tell you what they're doing. You can watch them work. Be a bridge if you can, Keisha. Be the kind that takes weight and holds." "It's nobody's job to save the whole city," he wrote. "But you can carry your corner. You can put a shoulder under something that's sagging. You did. Thank you." She closed the letter. The city shifted in the dark like a person turning over in sleep. According to the clock, she had to be up at 5:30 to prep for Sunday brunch. According to her heart, she had already started. In the morning, she taped a small piece of paper to the register. It had a line she'd heard twice now and felt differently each time. She wrote it in her own handwriting so she could feel the curve of the letters. Like and subscribe for more stories that challenge prejudice and celebrate courage. Then she added below it in smaller script a note to whoever would read it and to herself. "Stories don't change the world," she wrote. "People do. People turn, but stories turn the light on so people can see what they're doing. And when someone tells you the beam is rotten," she wrote, "don't paint it. Fix it."